Now, there are a few exceptions. For example, the parking space that we were talking about earlier. If you have a unit where you have one parking space, and let's say there's no parking on street, that's prohibited, they can come in and require you to have another parking space for that dwelling.
Right.
But it would have to be a set of circumstances along that line.
Definitely something, though, that you'd want to look into before starting to go down the road of building this.
Yeah, say, hey, there's plenty of room in the back, but there's no room to put in a parking space for it. Yeah,
Yes.
very true. Historical districts can also still retain the historical nature by, saying no to those or having their say-so of what they look like. So that is still something that they can do. And they can require different spaces, or different sizes, so it could be, hey, nothing less than 500 square feet. There's going to be some requirements in there as well. So they can still do that. And then you can't necessarily park your cousin's motorhome back in the backyard and call it an ADU.
Call it an ADU.
Let's just say no to something along that line.
Cousin Eddie.
Right?
Yeah.
Cousin Eddie.
And you
So,
brought,
sorry, I was just going to say it's not a free-for-all. I mean, you definitely have to come up with a plan and make sure that, all the powers that be are okay with it. But it
water and
is,
sewer, yeah.
yes, but it is loosening some of those restrictions.
Right,
So,
and hopefully that'll
and
make that.
putting some rules and boundaries around what people will do, because, otherwise I think it could get messy.
Yeah, and I think they realize that, and that's why they have some of those exceptions that are in place. And making sure that you have enough water, sewer capability for some of those as well. If you come into an area where there's no water taps, there's no water hardly available, and say, hey, we're going to double the housing in this area, is going to not
Right.
work. So water and sewer have an opportunity to restrict that as well. So if you're like in Netherlands, there's going to be still some impact fees. Like Netherlands still charges like $66,668 in order to hook into the water system. So they can definitely impose some of those impact fees as well, which kind of makes sense. I mean, if you're going to bring in new dwellings, you're going to have impact fees along the way.
Right.
Yeah, and that could become very cost prohibitive then.
It could, if you're looking at bringing in and building a very small unit back there. But then again, in that town, your housing's so expensive, maybe not.
Right.
But it's also surprising that that's considered an urban or metropolitan area as well, too.
That is interesting.
True.
So Lyons, though, currently charges nothing for those fees. But as you know, I mean, I think as we see more growth and development, that certainly could change. But
Yeah,
something
for
to be
sure.
aware of, just that you know where you're building and what those fees might be.
Right. And things can change too, because I really think if I had a client looking at doing something like this, I would advise them to really stick by the rules, but also be ready for things to change. So you may have to be adaptable.
Right.
Right? It's all new. So it's interesting because there's a couple of rules that are in place right now for City of Fort Collins for these units that are probably going to have to change over time. One of them is zoning. So anything that's in an RL district right now, you can't do this.
And
with.
what's an RL?
That is low density housing. That's most of our neighborhoods in Fort Collins. So I would certainly think that is going to have to change in order to conform to what the state is saying. Another big one on the zoning side is urban estates, because those are the larger parcels where you'd normally see these.
Right.
So you would have maybe an acre to work with, and that would be a great location to put one of these, and yet the city saying, no, sorry, you can't put them there.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that we'll see those changes in the future to conform. But things like the 100-year floodplain along the Poudre River, that just makes sense.
Right.
You're not going to be able to build these in areas like that. And there's floodplain maps that we can check to make sure.